So I'm now sitting with some of the board members, the CEO and Ron, who you just heard from. So let me just introduce everybody. This Ron Soifer, you've just met. This is Jennifer Henderson. This is Jeff Furman. This is Walt Freese, the CEO of Ben & Jerry's. And this is Pierre Ferrari, who you've already heard from, who's the chair of the board. And I'm on the board of directors as well. You'll notice that Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield are not here. They both decided not to come because they wanted to make a clear statement that they don't want to encourage any companies to get bought by multinationals. So that's the way that they wanted to be able to express that. That's really true to their values, and you notice that the board and the CEO and others, and I'm here, and Ron's here. It's because we recognize that the main thing that we're wanting to do is to help other people who will get bought by multinationals for whatever reason to understand some of the things that we learned. Ben and Jerry support us in doing that, but they wanted to not come to make that statement for everyone to know that they would prefer companies stay independent. So now let's start with Jeff. I'd like to ask you. Jeff Furman was one of the founders with Ben and Jerry at the very beginning. And I'd like to Jeff to have you say what you saw as the things that were most striking to you about this negotiation and this deal when it all ended up coming down. Yeah, you should take that one.
Ron. Well, I have to disagree with Terry. I don't believe companies should be encouraged to sell to multinationals either. I came because I'm part of the board and wanted to support Terry in the effort and be very comfortable in explaining why, if people are interested, why I think for us as a company, not for every company, but for us as a company, for me it felt like a mistake and a loss and deep amount of sadness in my personal life. Because I don't think under the structure, and Ron did a great job defining the structure, and it's Unilever has been a fine company to work with, and very reputable and very ethical. So it's not about Unilever, but it's just about my own personal feelings about the kind of company we want it to be, and you can't be that kind of company in the confines of a multinational. For example, we might, as a company, take a very strong position on Monsanto that would be very different from the position that Unilever would take on Monsanto, and we cannot, in good conscience, do it. And this is not to debate whether Monsanto is a good company or not, but that's a position that we can't do. We can't take positions on the war the way we used to years ago, the first Iraq war. So, you know, the companies that spoke here before seemed very environmentally focused and very concerned about what's in their product and realized that they could get more benefit from local farmers and producers because they were going to increase their volume. And I think that's a great value. For us as an organization, our mission was broader or different than that. I'm not trying to say which is better or worse, but it was a different kind of mission. I mean, we were real products of the 60s, irreverent in what we did, and really countercultural, and it's a cultural mesh that I just don't think it works very well for our company. And just before I pass it on, I will just, in Ron's presentation, I think one of the things that was important for me in agreeing to the deal was the things that we did for our employees of the company, and it was more than just staying in Vermont. Part of the money that Unilever paid for the company went directly to all employees excuse me, who were not shareholders. So it was $5 million that was spread around all our employees who'd been at the company. And the other thing that we put in perpetuity is the requirement that Unilever pay a livable wage for all Ben & Jerry's employees. And so these are things that were put in. But, that's my feeling of the deal. And I think when we ended up selling it, I feel that what got constructed is an excellent agreement. I would have preferred that we had nipped the road to selling much, much earlier in the process, and for that I feel, I'm personally responsible for not doing more in that effort.
Jeff, let me ask you another question. I'm sensing something here, and I just want to see if you agree with me or not. Those of us in our generation had a higher priority for this, what we would call the social mission activities. We cared very strongly on who owned the company and who controlled the company. A number of the people that have spoken in the later generations, their highest priority seemed to be the environment. which had them be a little more comfortable with the product. You know, like Tom's of Maine has been very clear that the reason he sold to Colgate is because he thought that the environmental aspect of his toothpaste products would get to a larger base of customers by going through Colgate, and that was far more important to him. Do you think there's a little bit of a pattern there or not?
Well, I don't know. I think in this country and under the capitalist model, and one of our values that we state and that Unilever adopted are concerns about the capitalist model, which creates great inequity. I view that as, for me, as the pressing issue in my life. So it's that issue that, for some reason, I was born at a time when that happened, or however that came to fruition. I really don't know, but it has been a lifetime pressing issue for me, and so I don't know if it's a generational thing or not. I think it's a system thing that's happened, and if you look at what's happened in the 40 years since I was, been doing this kind of stuff, we haven't done a great job in dealing with the inequities that are happening in this country and around the world.
And it's quite clear, especially with the emergence of fair trade, that there's a much more concern about the social aspects and not only the environmental aspects these days. So they're both present, but I just began to notice a sense of that pattern. Could you pass the microphone to Jennifer? And Jennifer, what do you want to say about this deal that is probably most important to you to say at this point that could be helpful to others?
I think it was interesting. I know that Ron talked about the fissures that were going on in the board, and I want to just spend a minute talking about that because it made it a very uncomfortable position to be in. All of us loved the company. We all loved Ben and Jerry, Jeff. We all thought that we could find some miracle to make it not possible, not mandatory for us to sell the company. There were a majority of us that banded together at different points that really stalled the process. She probably figured out, but stalled the process long enough so that we could continue to look at several other options. As you heard from Terry, when those options disappeared, then it became clear that we were going to be a different kind of company. And so there was some realization that we had to figure out a different kind of model to continue to be progressive. But I think that one of the things that did come up was that during the time we were going through these ad nauseum meetings and like 18 months worth of meetings, we started to reminisce about why the company was so important to us. So I wanted to share with you one of the experiences that I had. I first met Ben at a meeting at a loft in New York City where he was putting together 1% for Peace. And I had no understanding that you could even be a good business person. I was an activist, a kind of revolutionary person, didn't think that you could really do this, had organized welfare rights, and so I really didn't believe that Ben and Jerry's could do the kinds of things that they said that they were going to do and wanted to do. But after the experience with 1% for Peace and seeing the company living out its values in such risk-taking ways, high visibility, risk-taking ways, that was the real seller for me around the company. And so as we began thinking about what we might lose or what we might trade off in that process, that was the reason why the agreement became so important. And it became so important for us to spend time with Unilever so they understood the fundamental essence of the company so that they would not kind of in a capricious way say that this was not important or that was not important, but they would understand, as I think many of the people that I presented earlier, how closely knit this was. It was really impossible to pull it away. There were non-negotiables you couldn't pull away. So I think that's what became clearer. So those of us that were pre-acquisition became more and more committed to making sure that the company stayed true.
Pierre, let me ask you if there's anything that you want to throw in now about the actual deal that ended up being struck that is on your mind at this point after its presentation's been made.
Actually, I want to go as to why the deal happened, it just as Ron was presenting, I was thinking about some of the pre-acquisition board meetings where the CEO that was in charge of the company at the time, I think it was maybe his first meeting, proposed a series of stock option grants that we had approved for him, and then he'd actually approved or was recommending for staff. And I remember there was a discussion about the possible unintended consequences of that, which was going to create a group of people that was, yes, indeed, according to current theory of the time, aligned with shareholders' interest. That actually has been debunked from an academic point of view. The research has shown that there's very little alignment between stock option ownership and alignment with shareholder interest. But it did create an incentive, a very strong and powerful financial incentive. The average senior executive at Ben & Jerry's stood to make well over $1 million if the sale took place. And one of the issues we had, if we didn't want to sell the company, was actually to retain the staff to run the company if indeed we didn't sell the company. So there was really this in fact, I think you brought it up in one of your slides, Ron, that it was this division between, because there we were, a board of directors that, well, Ben and Jerry, obviously were going to make a substantial amount of money through the sale, but the rest of us weren't. So there was no, and yet the staff was. So we, the board, actually approved certain steps that led to, I think, the demise. And so that's still a little painful that we're responsible.
The next thing I want to ask the board members here is, Jennifer, why don't you tell us what was the most painful part of this process for you? What was the part that was really, really difficult, besides the long hours and all of that, that made these negotiations so really arduous for you?
I think it wasn't the negotiations so much as the realization that the company would never be the same again, and that the other presenters have talked about. I think you talked about, Frederick, the idea of just talking with your father and making something happen, making a decision happen. It wasn't quite that easy, but there was this sense that there were ways of doing things, that you could gather people around who had like minds and had shared values, so you could make some things happen. That the things that were going on in the larger world, we could bring into the company and kind of live that out through the way that we did our business. That was what we thought was going to be at high risk. And it's just important, if all of you don't know kind of the history, there are a number of books been written, of course, about Ben & Jerry's, but the activism, this kind of guerrilla activism and all the things that made the company itself, we knew that those things were not going to be as easy. Again, I agree with Jeff that there were some things that Unilever put into the agreement that have allowed us to do some things that I didn't think were going to be possible in the past. But clearly, it's different than having an independent company, and even different than having a public company when you're owned by a multinational. So the layers and the cultures that we had to transverse. The other piece of it is that Ron, who's sitting here, is the only person left at Unilever that has the history. And so in the beginning of the acquisition, we had people at Unilever who had been through the 18 months of kind of experience. They were, well, cousins. Maybe not in family, but they were cousins. And you could call the cousins and work things out with the cousins. But as people began to leave, then we began to have a new cast of characters who didn't have that history with us. And then suddenly we were, this company that had this weird structure that we had to begin to train again or educate people about again.
I would just add, for me, one of the most painful pieces of this transaction, as a result of our evolvement as a company. We evolved from the idea that we had initially was that businesses had a responsibility to give back to the community. And that was sort of a trademark line that Ben & Jerry's had initially. We then evolved to the understanding that the most important thing is how you ran your business day to day and the values that you did. So it wasn't just what you gave out at the end of the year that was the real relevance of being a social responsibility, but it's your day-to-day operations. And then we even began, in some sense, to evolve further with the idea that if you wanted real social change to happen, you could look at what social change you wanted to have happen and understand how to use your business to make that happen. And that's the beginning of a process in my own maturation, I think, and with the company, understanding what we could have done. We were at the cusp of that somehow, and beginning to think about how to do that. And of course, those things blended somehow. But we lost the opportunity to really do that. We lost the opportunity. So when you travel around I travel mostly in this country, and you see all the needs that go around, and I keep wanting to reach into my Ben & Jerry's head and say, oh, we can do this. We can come out with a flavor to deal with the issues in the Delta in Mississippi. We could do something here. And then I realize I can't do anything. I don't have that access anymore. And so that's the saddest part for me.
The one significant change that Jeff is bringing us to is that part of the code of ethics of Unilever is it's nonpartisan. And so Ben & Jerry's was comfortable taking on issues that were partisan. Now that's something that we can't do. We find clever ways to get around it, in legal ways to get around it. We've done a number of things around the environment, around other issues and social issues, but we can't do anything that could be perceived as partisan. But now I want to switch it over to Walt, who's the CEO of Ben & Jerry's. And I'd like Walt to begin to share with you some of the positive things that we've been able to do and sustain the culture, which we definitely have been able to do, and some of the challenges of being able to continue to do that.
Okay, so I inherited the agreement that everybody's been talking to up until now. So let me talk to you about some of my feelings and the feelings of the employees as I came to join Ben & Jerry's. I had come from another socially responsible business, Celestial Seasonings, down the mountain in Boulder, Colorado. We were acquired at about the same time Ben & Jerry's was. The company that acquired Celestial really wasn't committed to maintaining the culture and values, and I got the call from Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's was a company that I had wanted to work for forever. I had actually interviewed with Ben by phone in 1988 for a marketing director slot and was told that my credentials were right, but I was a little bit young for a director role. So I had been wanting to do this for a long time, and I came into this role wanting to join the company that Ben & Jerry had created. So I came in, I looked at the acquisition agreement, and I said, do you know what? Versus most of the other acquisition agreements I had seen in my life, this was probably about the best I had seen in terms of assuring the future of the company. There were a few things that I would learn and challenge the board and the past management about. And you'll learn, we work closely enough as a board. We're like brothers and sisters. We're very open with each other, and our board meetings are not the calmest of meetings, but they always wind up with wonderful outcomes. One is this. You know, if you're a values-led company and you don't want to be acquired, think twice about going public. Okay? That's one thing. The second thing is, if you're a values-led company and a public company, remember that if you're truly going to be successful and sustainable, you've got to grow your business, you've got to be highly profitable, and you've got to lead with your values. I think Ben & Jerry's truly left itself vulnerable in that it was certainly a values-led business. It was growing, though it was debatable whether it was growing at the rate that really realized its full potential, and it was far from being highly profitable. So it became a candidate, a natural candidate for acquisition. So unless that had been addressed, it was going to get acquired. You know, the writing was in the cards. The mechanics, you know, of how it happened were in many respects regrettable. But I will tell you this, if Ben & Jerry's was going to be acquired by a multinational, they'd be hard-pressed to find a better multinational to be acquired by than Unilever, which is one of the few multinationals that is approved, among other things, by the Calvert Fund and others as truly a socially responsible company. And I think it has a lot to do with its Anglo-Dutch roots, which tend to be far more, you know, progressive, almost by nature, than most U.S.-based businesses. So we could have done a heck of a lot worse. The acquisition agreement, I think, was brilliant. There were a few things that I think were missing. So this is where I get to take out my presentation, where I say, I've got some problems with you people. No, in all seriousness, if I had to do it over in terms of lessons learned, you know, based on how things operate today, here's what I might do differently. Because I do want to say, I think the acquisition agreement was brilliant and should be a model for businesses being acquired because it operates in perpetuity. I think the idea of an independent board of directors, to me in my role, has been invaluable. Ben & Jerry's couldn't maintain its values without this independent board of directors. And I think Unilever gave us the ability to leverage its core competencies to grow this brand and to leverage its values to an extent it otherwise probably wouldn't have been able to do. So today, the business is over twice the size it was at the time of acquisition. We're operating in over 26 countries. And we still very much practice the core three-part mission statement that the brand was built on, that says we're going to make the best ice cream money can buy, we're going to earn a fair return for our stakeholders, and we are going to be a progressive force for social and economic justice and the environment. Now, I think Terry was absolutely right in saying Unilever's stance is that Ben & Jerry's should be nonpartisan. To tell you the truth, from my perspective, and I'm an activist by nature, it's not a severe limitation on Ben & Jerry's today. And what I mean by that is we get to focus on issues. When they say partisanship, they say don't focus on candidates or parties. That's not a big deal for us. We're able to take on contentious issues like federal budget priorities and really argue that we should be spending less money on wasteful and unnecessary weapons programs and more money on basic human needs. We are able to contest, and Jeff, this will be news to you, but we are able to contest when companies like Monsanto are going state by state trying to reverse laws around RBGH-free labeling, and go state by state as Ben & Jerry's and contest this. So we're doing this right now. We're able to go down to Washington, D.C. and protest in front of the Capitol about the FDA's attempt to move quietly through with legislation that would permit the U.S. to be the first company on the planet to permit milk and meat from cloned animals into the food supply. We were able to go down as a company prior to our invasion of Iraq and be the only company I know of that was down there protesting that potential action with our Ben & Jerry's for Peace program. So there are a lot of things that we do. And I will tell you that there was when I stepped in, there was a huge level of resentment among employees that people would look at Ben & Jerry's and say, do you know what? Ben & Jerry's has been acquired, therefore Ben & Jerry's no longer has its values intact or no longer is truly Ben & Jerry's. They said, wait a minute, there are 600 of us. We're the people who have made the values real every day for the past 20-odd years. And we're the people who are going to continue to make those values real. So I don't want to go on here for too long, but I do want to say that we've had tremendous freedom when it comes to practicing our social mission. And at the same time, I'm proud to say right now, we're the fastest growing business in the ice cream. Unilever's the largest global ice cream business in the world. Ben & Jerry's right now is the fastest growing business within Unilever Ice Cream. We're the most highly profitable business within Unilever Ice Cream, and we continue to lead with our values. Now, from where I sit, that's a model other companies will want to emulate. But I do really believe that if you're sitting out there in the world and saying, you too can be a values-led, relatively low growth, marginally profitable company, how would you like to emulate our model? You're not going to find a lot of takers. So in many respects, I think in terms of what the hope or vision was, that we do hold out a lot of hope to this day for other businesses that it is possible. And if I get,
Why don't you let us know of a couple of the recent brand, ice cream flavors we brought out and the organizations they're connected to? Just to show-
yeah, so just, I mean, let's just talk about what we've got going on this year, for example. We've got one flavor called One Cheesecake Brownie that is really focused on the Millennium Development Goals. We're doing this in concert with the One organization founded by Bono, which is really dedicated to raising awareness of the Millennium Development Goals. And the whole premise, for anybody who may be unaware of them, is that we can eradicate extreme poverty in our lifetimes if we choose to make that decision or choice as societies. So we're doing this in partnership with the One organization and with Google. So that's one of the major things that we're doing. There's an entire activation program around this. I won't go into a lot of details, but I'll say whether you walk into our scoop shops, whether you go on the web, whether you look at PR, event, guerrilla marketing, other things we're doing, this is the #1 initiative for the company worldwide. So where one doesn't exist, we're doing it with the UN Millennium Campaign. Second flavor we're introducing, Imagine World Peace. We're doing this in coordination or in partnership with the John Lennon Foundation. It's the first product or partnership of this nature that they've ever done before. And it's really intended to honor John Lennon's vision of what peace could be and what it would mean on the planet. So we're doing it not just in concert with the Lennon Foundation, but also with an organization called Peace One Day that was started by a gentleman named Jeremy Gilley, who was successful in having September 21st of each year named World Peace Day, where the goal is, on the part of the United Nations, that hostilities will stop around the planet and that we will actually teach peace. And if we can do this for one day, maybe we can do it for 2, and maybe we can do it for more. That's our other major activation for the year. So we seek in everything that we do, and this is one of the things that I don't think has come through in our discussion today, every employee at Ben & Jerry's has built into their performance development goals specific social mission objectives that in part their compensation is based on. So everyone in the company is charged with the idea, with every decision they make, is there a way I could make this decision that would serve in the best interests of the environment or social and economic justice, to use the power of the business to really transform society and the world? So those are just a couple of examples of things we're doing this year.
So now I'd like to have each person up here, and let me start with you, Ron. What do you think has been the most challenging thing about all of us being able to fulfill this agreement that we've made with each other? Unilever's made it with us, and we've each made it with each other and with Unilever to fulfill the agreement to sustain the social mission and the brand integrity.
For me, the most difficult piece of it is we had hoped that Ben & Jerry's would be a role model within Unilever, and so there would be some learnings that would flow back from Ben & Jerry's to Unilever. And I think that may be true in certain respects, but that really needs to be grappled with more seriously, because I think Unilever has been a terrific acquisition for all the reasons that Walt has laid out. What would really be terrific in addition is if there's certain social mission principles that would find their way back into Unilever's other businesses, in addition to the sustainability, the environmental issues, the ethical issues that Unilever really does stand up for. And I just want to add one quick thing, because you said that Unilever does not allow things to be done that are partisan, and Walt very clearly explained why it really hasn't been an effective limitation on what Ben & Jerry's can really do. And all I wanted to explain is why Unilever takes the position, because it'll give you a sense of different perspectives. Unilever does not want to be in the business in any country within which it operates to affect government change. There have been too many examples in history where companies were involved with toppling one government or another. So Unilever has come up with a commitment to say, Unilever in no country in the world will allow partisan activities of trying to topple one government or change the party in power. And that's why Unilever, for example, doesn't have a PAC in the United States. It's just been a decision that Unilever took, I think, from an ethical perspective, which is important from a global perspective, and didn't want to be in the position of saying, in the U.S. you can do certain things, but in Sudan you can't do certain things. So it's taken a prophylactic view across the world to say, Unilever will not involve itself in partisan activities, but Unilever will involve itself in public policy issues that are important to the communities within which our facilities operate.
Let me tell a story that is relevant to what Ron just said. The first CEO of Ben & Jerry's was Yves Coët, excuse me. And I remember at the first kind of reception was on a lawn somewhere, and I was walking with Yves, and I was saying, how do you think about, the social responsible environmental issues and these kind of things? He says, oh, I understand all of that. I understand it all. I know what that means. And I could just feel by the way he said it that it probably wasn't as deeply known as we would have liked. So I said, Yves, many of the people on the board have been dealing with these issues for 20 plus years, so we have a lot of experience there. And he said, yeah, I understand. And I kind of felt like he was brushing it off a little bit. At his last board meeting, after he'd been our CEO for 3 years, where he really did a beautiful job, he was almost in tears when he said to us, I can't tell you how much I appreciate what I've learned here. And I'm going back over and I'm going to take over the running of Lipton Teas. And he said, and I'm going to carry what I've learned here back with me. He went back and became head of Lipton Teas, and he set Lipton Teas on a course where within, I think it's 2 or 3 more years, the commitment is that Lipton Tea will be fair trade all over the world. So that's a clear example of where somebody got moved and there was some reverse osmosis that began to take place inside Unilever. The other thing that would be good for you to know is at the time that Unilever acquired Ben & Jerry's, it was ranked by the social responsible investment groups as the #1 multinational company in terms of the environment. So it does have a strong tradition, and that was part of the reason that I wanted to stop it from going to another company or two, because I knew that once I learned that Unilever was involved, I knew that it would be a far better company to acquire Ben & Jerry's to sustain the values. So let me see, Pierre, if you want to add something in here about what do you think have been some of the challenges of us on the board, these last 7 years?
Well, there's been a lot of cultural. Who was it that was talking about the cultural challenge? I think it was you, Craig, about the anthropology of it all. And I think you mentioned it too, Ron. I think that my observation of the biggest difficulties we've had to do with the fact that the company is slowly, in spite of the legal agreement, the sales agreement, is slowly being dissolved into the Unilever system. And that has the long-term negative, and we didn't protect ourselves from that. And one of the specifics that has surfaced already, and Ron mentioned it in his presentation, is that, and I worked for a multinational for a couple of decades, is that they do manage their businesses on a portfolio basis. They look at business in totality. They report back to the shareholders with a single P&L. So for them, Ben & Jerry's in the United States, Dove in France, or whatever the brands are, et cetera, are all part of a portfolio businesses they aggregate ultimately for a return to shareholders. And rightly, as managers of a $50 billion behemoth, they will do the trade-offs. They are trained to do that. And being in that kind of portfolio situation means that Walt's incredible success, Yves' incredible success in terms of taking the equity that was built over a couple of decades and translating into fast sales, high profit margins, great profitability, is now being tapped to make up for some of the problems and some of the difficulties they have with their other products, other brands. And that has a pretty serious deleterious effect on both the expression of the social mission we would like to have. It can retard the growth of the company, and like many of the companies we've talked about, much of our social mission activity is linked to the sale. So if you're a fair traded company, if you sell less, we actually have less of an effect back with banana growers or cocoa growers or whatever else. So it actually has a negative effect on the communities that are disadvantaged. And that, to me, is the and because I've seen it. I used to manage, I managed several $1 billion worth of business, and I used to do that. This is how you manage brands and you manage businesses, business units. And to be on the receiving side of that is is the most difficult part. And I don't think we can change that.
I'm going to come back to you, Walt, for a minute, because why don't you share with? I think we need a couple examples of the difficulties we have of the kind of thing that Pierre was just talking about. So, Walt, why don't you share the problem that we had with the paperboard for the pints?
Yeah, and this is a good example of how the board and Unilever work in cooperation, or what Ron, I think, correctly referred to as dynamic tension, and I'm sort of the gasket in that dynamic tension function. So FSC paperboard was something that was identified as an opportunity by somebody who works on, which is Forest Stewardship Council certified paperboard, which is paperboard which is endorsed by the Rainforest Alliance as the most sustainable source of paperboard available. Was identified as the person responsible for packaging development as Ben & Jerry's as a real potential option for us to improve our environmental track record. Now, Unilever looked at this as a cost savings opportunity. Ben & Jerry's had been in a dioxin-free eco-pint. Now, we wanted to go to FSC paperboard for all the right reasons, I think, but what had not been done at the time was Unilever had presented a case for the economics of moving to FSC certified paperboard. What the board insisted on, and rightly so, was to understand the total effects of doing that. The downside was there was now going to be some dioxin in the paperboard we purchased. So what we needed to understand was and the board pushed back on, is what were the environmental benefits of moving to this paperboard, and what were the potential environmental risks. So we had everybody from from Unilever supply chain, Ben & Jerry's environmental affairs, R&D, packaging development, really working through this to the point where I think as a board and Unilever, we could finally look at each other and say, this is the right direction for us to move in. Another good example, if I can just add one more, was maybe even a better example, was Ben & Jerry's historically in the United States had always been produced in Vermont. Back just about a year and a half ago, there was a motion on the table that Ben & Jerry's should begin producing in Henderson, Nevada, a plant that Unilever owned in the western U.S. Now, there were certain economic advantages to doing that, obviously in terms of transportation and being close to the markets in which we distribute. There were also significant risks. What would this mean for the Vermont family farmers we would protect? What would this mean for our identity as a brand? What would this mean for our commitment to RBGH-free and small family farms? What would this mean for our commitment to the environment and CO2 emissions? So there was a terrific series of dialogues with the board over, I would say, probably 6 months, in which we discussed all aspects of this transition. And it moved from becoming an economic proposition in the minds of supply chain to become truly a, how do we look at this as a values-led business and make the decision, can we do this in a way that both improves our environmental track record, that reduces CO2 emissions, yet maintains our support for family farms and RBGH-free dairy. And we were able to devise a compromise, because that's really what it was, that said not only were we going to maintain, but we were going to grow our demand for RBGH-free dairy from Vermont dairy farmers, that we were going to find a RBGH-free source of dairy from family farms in the western U.S. that we were going to mandate that this plant use. We looked at the CO2 emissions and other environmental implications of making this move, and we finally decided as a board of directors that it was something that we were willing to approve. But this is exactly the kind of creative tension that exists as a result of this unique acquisition agreement, and is the kind of dynamic tension that will exist in perpetuity. Because we're trying to do all those things right, running a great financial model, but being true to our values. And this is where the board is truly invaluable in making sure that we do both.
Jennifer and Jeff, I want to ask each of you to take a turn. Say, what's been the most challenging thing for you in the last 7 years of being on the board and trying to stay within this agreement and fulfill our mission?
I'm thinking about the past 7 years, but I'm also thinking ahead. The two of the biggest challenges I think facing the company are this global expansion, because Ben & Jerry's is typically an American company. And as Walt talked about, we've gone now into 26 countries. And the question is, how do we roll out the business in a way that's truly Ben & Jerry's in so many countries and doing it so quickly? So that's one of the challenges I think that we're going to be facing, because we want to do it the right way. We don't want to roll out the company in a way that doesn't include the social mission. And that's a challenge. So that's one piece. One thing that I think will help that is that you've been introduced to a part of the board. In the agreement, we have additional slots for more board members, and we've been talking about how to reach out to other parts of the world for board members so that then we're more representative of a global brand, and then have those perspectives more represented on the board in decision making. So I think that's going to help quite a bit. In fact, we're going on our second trip to Europe as a board. We took our first trip in November, and we'll be taking another trip in August to Rotterdam, so we can have a better sense of our comrades and colleagues that are working internationally. We just have to be a global board if we're going to be a part of a global brand. The other is that Unilever has been typically, it was typically a soap company initially, and on environmental issues, it's very good. On economic justice issues, it's still a novice. It's still learning. But if you're going to be the owner of Ben & Jerry's, a typically American company, you got to get the economic justice right. And so we're still struggling around what that really means. Within the company, it is living wage, and it is really making sure that we're caring about our employees. Inside the company also, it's around the vendors and the supply chain. But outside, what does it mean for the community? And what does it mean for the issues that the community is facing? So we have to figure that out with our colleagues at Unilever.
I'd add a few things. One, I think the basic issue and struggle for our board is really to maintain the values. Walt talked about our Henderson experience. It's a real example of the struggle around this issue, because, as I said earlier, the agreement says we pay a livable wage for our Ben & Jerry's employees. Those in Henderson technically are not Ben & Jerry's employees, therefore, you don't have to follow the agreement. So the struggle for how do you really take this? The agreement is terrific, and it's who could have figured out all the nuances going into it. But that's an example. One thing we just started to do, which I feel incredibly excited about, as a board, is take a proactive stance. We submitted a paper, and it's practically complete, and this is going to have a few changes that will go to Unilever about the requirements that we're going to expect on any expansion into Asia. So so there's a list of whole things. If you go into Asia and there's going to be a manufacturing facility, the rights of the workers, where you site the plant, environmental considerations, are all going to be stuff that has to be considered before you go in. So right now, we've really only been reactive. How to get ahead of that curve, given the issues that Jennifer mentioned about now that we're global, and who the heck knows when we meet 3 or 4 times a year of what really is going on in a global sense for Ben & Jerry's is important. And I think it's how do we get to that place that I think is our biggest hurdle.
I want to tell one of the significant stories for me. When Ben & Jerry's was acquired, the CEO and chair, same person, came over and visited with us, spoke to all of the employees, came to our board meeting. We went afterwards to dinner. After dinner, I confronted him with this. I didn't mean to confront him, but I brought this up to him. And I said, Unilever is the 3rd largest consumer products on the planet, consumer products company on the planet. I said something to the extent, although I didn't use these exact words, about the fact that how strong multinationals were. That 51% of the biggest economies on the planet are multinationals in 49 countries. I said, so I looked at him and I said, you're one of the most powerful people on the planet. I said, there's this situation where the highest priority of a multinational is the financial interest of the shareholders, which we were very close to because we'd just gone through that whole thing with the law and everything else. I said, I believe that the highest priority for each of us, any person or group, is the common good of us all. And I think that's very natural and appropriate. So my perspective is that the contract that the nation state has with the corporation isn't a really moral contract. If you're giving priorities to something other than the common good, I would argue that that's not really a moral position. I said, what do you think, you, as one of the most powerful people on the planet, should do about that? He looked back at me and just said, Terry, that's none of my business. He said, my responsibility is to the shareholders. I'm here for another 4 or 5 years, then I'm out of here. I said, that's the responsibility. He says, that's the responsibility of government. It's not my responsibility. And I looked back and I said, in other words, you work for the contract. And he basically looked at me and nodded as if, yes, my responsibility is to the shareholders. And it suddenly dawned on me, oh my God. These multinationals are organizations where everybody, including the chairman and the CEO, are working for the contract, which I happen to think is fundamentally immoral in some ways. And so I began to say, we have to figure out a way to do something about changing this that is embedded in that contract. What's been struggling for us is having Ben & Jerry's be inside Unilever is that Unilever's highest priority is the financial interest of the shareholders. So we are constantly trying to have them make space for our social mission. And if we didn't have those metric agreements and the agreements that we have by contract, it would be very hard to sustain it. So our board is essential to doing that, as particularly Ron and Walt have pointed out. So it's really important to realize that in order to push the envelope inside a multinational company, you need to have a contract to do so, or it gets very difficult at the highest level as to what the highest priority of the company is, because by contract, with the shareholders and with the state, the highest priority is the financial return. So part of what we're all sitting here talking about is how does socially responsible companies come into existence, stay in existence, and become part of multinationals in a way where we begin to change some of those behaviors and some of those sets of priorities. Is there anyone else up here would like to add to anything that we've said?
I want to add something to what you just said, Terry. I think my guess is that the founders here of socially responsible companies probably would find what you just said slightly objectionable, in the sense that I think we've proven, and the reason that Unilever wanted to buy Ben & Jerry's, that the social responsible behavior is a substantial component of the value and the source of profits. And we and the culture of a Unilever or Coca-Cola or a Colgate or Hershey's is that they don't get that. It is foreign to them. That idea of being a good citizen, of caring for the common good, is actually a financial enhancement. It's not done for financial enhancement, but it creates financial enhancement. And that's one of the challenges. And I think, Ron, by the way, I'll compliment you publicly, you get that. And there are a few others. Eve Couette got it and changed a $4 billion brand in the process. But that's the challenge that we have, and I think we've done as a board an inadequate job teaching our counterparts at Unilever that. And it is such a, just to use a title phrase, such a paradigm shift that, I mean, if anybody has any ideas on how to get that done, that would be hugely useful. So,
Can I say something, Jerry? One of the main reasons that I joined Ben and Jerry's was this. There was part of me as an activist that got really tired sitting around Boulder, Colorado, with other small, values-led businesses talking about how we were going to change the world, when in reality, we didn't have the collective clout to do it. The best we could hope to be was a model for change in the world that other larger companies would want to emulate. One of the things that really got me excited, as much as nervous as I was about going to work, for Ben & Jerry's as part of a large organization, which was Unilever, was a company, a multinational company that was saying, we do want to learn from you. We do want to incorporate and understand better how you operate and what makes you successful, and how we could leverage those values in our business, what we could learn from you. Now I thought there's an opportunity to really create transformative change from a guerrilla standpoint, from the inside out. Now, it has not happened nearly as fast or at the magnitude as maybe we would have hoped. But I will say this, the example that I think Terry gave about Lipton Tea becoming, fair trade certified globally, is enormous when you talk about the power of change. I will say this too. I'm as guilty as anybody in the past with having objectified multinationals. And it's easy to objectify anything. And any of us knows, with a spiritual practice, or at least certain spiritual practices, that it's easy to hate anything that you objectify and make us other, right? Well, the fact of the matter is, Unilever is not just a multinational, it's people who come to work every day. And as an organization and as human beings, these people evolve. And Ron mentioned early on that the two chairmen who were present, at the time of the acquisition, and one of them was the person that Terry talked to, are no longer chairman of Unilever. I would invite you to go on to the web today and look at comments by the current CEO, Patrick Seskow, about the role of social responsibility in business. Because I think were you to go to the website and look up some of the speeches that Patrick Seskow has given about corporate social responsibility and the role of business in society, you would be surprised. I have to tell you, I was surprised initially to see the level of transformation that had taken place in the CEO of Unilever. This is a man now who is leading a company that has insisted that every single brand in Unilever go through something called the brand imprint process. What that means is if you work for Unilever and are responsible for any brand anywhere in the world, you need to define uniquely where you stand with regard to how you give back to the community and what your role is in that community. And it can be environmental, it can be social, it can be as diverse as Lipton going fair trade certified, or it can be as diverse as Dove launching the campaign for real beauty, which some of you may have seen, that says for the first time, by a health and personal care products company, that we need to stop creating this false image of beauty among women based on air-touched models in magazines, and billboards, and that we need to celebrate the beauty of women as human beings for exactly who they are as real people. It's very diverse when you go from brand to brand, but that is required of every brand within Unilever right now. And we are being challenged across the board, as Unilever, to get better at this in every way we do business. So I do want to emphasize the fact, is there a lot of room to grow? Absolutely. But Unilever's not static either. And it is a company truly in transformation. But I would say, I don't know of any multinational that's done more in a shorter period of time than Unilever to create a truly transformative environment at a time when transformation's really needed.
Ron, you wanted to put something in on this?
I really think that
You- you put-
I really think that Walt has said it all. But all I would say is, in addition to looking at the CEO's speeches, I would go to the website and look at the social and sustainability report, which is done on an annual basis, which actually sets targets and reports on how Unilever is doing in meeting those targets. So it's a measurable transformation going on within the business.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that that it's important that we recognize that the consciousness has been being raised all over the planet, which is such a wonderful thing, and we are very aware of this around the environment, and it's increasingly happening around social issues, as fair trade is clearly revealing. And so I want to point out that I also see Unilever as a stellar company, as a multinational, but I also don't want to shy away from the fact that priorities are priorities, and if your priority is legally the financial interest of your shareholders, you need to be giving that priority as part of your contract. What I'm loving is that we're beginning to see that all of these social environmental things become an essential part, as Pierre was pointing out, of what is a good product and what is a good company.
Exactly.
And the more people think that way, the more it'll be essential for the Unilevers of the world and the multinationals to behave in such a way. So that was the second point I was making last night. We need to have the multinationals change along with the rest of us as we grow in these ways. Is there anyone else who wants to throw in a last thing before we're done here? Good. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been one of the most interesting gatherings that I've ever been a part of. And let me tell you, if you're interested in being on a seat on the board of Ben & Jerry's, let us know.